Hi, I'm Ardelia, the quiet one, the artist, the daughter who never fit the Monroe mold. At my father's will reading, my sister said, "The $15 million house doesn't belong to you." Everyone nodded, like I wasn't even in the room. But then, the lawyer handed me a USB. That's when everything unraveled. My father's secrets, my sister's betrayal, the forged documents. They erased me from our family's legacy. But what if the house wasn't the only thing they tried to steal? And what if my silence wasn't weakness, but the beginning of something much louder? They say grief doesn't hit you all at once. It builds in the silence, settles in the corners. I felt it most when I stepped into that oak-paneled room, where the air was thick with whispered judgment and the scent of polished wood. That room at Monroe and Brandt's law office had seen its share of inheritance battles. Today, it saw me, Ardelia Quinn, 33, the one they always forgot to include on the Christmas card list. The ceiling fan hummed lazily above us, doing little to stir the heavy spring air. Charleston heat had a way of slowing things down, but not the minds in that room. Everyone was alert, calculating. I could feel it. A dozen eyes, watching, waiting. No one greeted me when I walked in. Not even Callista. Callista Monroe. My older sister by 5 years, and by Charleston's standards, a whole galaxy. Her navy blue blazer didn't wrinkle, her pearl earrings matched her fake composure, and when she stood up from her seat at the head of the table, she did it like she was on stage. Not a strand of hair dared move out of place. "Didn't expect you'd come," she said to me, her voice sweet as a spoonful of cough syrup. "I don't recall needing an invitation," I replied, keeping my tone flat. Her smile didn't waver. "Of course not." We both sat down. I avoided looking at her. I kept my eyes on the man across from us, Mr. Langford, our father's longtime attorney. He had the kind of face that seemed permanently furrowed, like every sentence cost him a wrinkle. His assistant was still organizing files, adjusting his glasses, making a show of the ceremony. I adjusted my chair, my fingertips brushing against the cool edge of the mahogany table. My seat was at the far end. No one had saved a spot for me. No one ever did. The Monroe family hierarchy was as unspoken as it was ruthless. There were those who ran the show, and then there was me, the artist's daughter, who photographed shadows and called it work. Langford finally cleared his throat. "We'll begin now. Thank you all for coming. As you know, Mr. Jonathan Monroe passed 2 weeks ago. His final wishes have been documented in a formal will, signed and witnessed." My throat tightened slightly. Not because I expected anything, not anymore, but because this was final. My father was really gone. Langford began reading. One by one, the gifts were listed. Antique watches, stocks, heirlooms, even the china no one ever used. When he got to the house, my pulse skipped. It wasn't just real estate. It was the house where my mother taught me to paint in the garden, where I stayed after her funeral while the rest of them checked into hotels. It was the only place that ever felt like it belonged to me. Langford barely opened his mouth before Callista interrupted. "The $15 million house doesn't belong to her," she said, cutting through the room like a blade. A few relatives shifted in their seats. One actually chuckled. I sat completely still. Langford looked at her, surprised. "Excuse me?" Callista leaned back, crossing her legs. "Let's not pretend. My father told me years ago he wouldn't leave that house to someone who couldn't manage an Etsy shop." My ears burned. My fists tightened on my lap, but I didn't speak. I studied her face. Not a single crack. It wasn't about the house. It was about power. Erasing me was part of her design. "He said it himself," she added, her voice sugary. "He didn't want that property to fall apart in the hands of sentiment." My jaw clenched. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I swallowed every word, tucked it behind a clenched smile. "You don't win in that room by yelling. You win by remembering." 2 days ago, I'd walked into that house, alone. The keys still worked. I told myself I just wanted to say goodbye. What I found made that impossible. Every photograph of my mother and me had been replaced with Callista's framed articles, magazine features, charity awards. Even the painting I did when I was 12, the one Mom hung in the hallway, was gone. I stood in the living room, hands trembling, scanning for anything familiar. Nothing. It was like we'd never existed there, like my childhood had been cleaned out, sanitized, edited. That's when I knew. This wasn't a disagreement. This was a deletion. Back in the conference room, Langford continued reading. My name hadn't come up again. I wasn't surprised. I felt their eyes. Callista's smug look. The others barely hiding their boredom. The room smelled of legal paper and old resentment. I inhaled slowly. Exhaled even slower. When you hold your tongue, my mentor once told me, you hear their truth louder. So I listened. Just as Langford prepared to close the file, he paused. One more thing, he said, reaching for a separate envelope. Mr. Monroe left a personal item to be delivered to Ms. Quinn directly. He held out a sleek white envelope. It was thin, but heavier than it looked. Everyone turned toward me. I walked slowly, took it without speaking, sat down again. I slipped a nail beneath the seal. Inside was a small USB drive, black, smooth, and silent. Callista's smile twitched. Just barely. I didn't know what was on that drive. But in that moment, I realized something. My father may have been silent, but silence doesn't mean absence. When I walked back into my apartment, the doorknob felt colder than usual. The hallway lights flickered above me, but I didn't bother to fix them. My fingers gripped the envelope like it might disintegrate if I let it go. The USB inside pressed against my palm with a quiet urgency I couldn't shake. The place was still. No noise from the neighbors, no sirens outside for once. Just the ticking of the wall clock and my own breath. Shallow, controlled. I kicked off my shoes and dropped my bag by the door. My jacket slid from my shoulders, and I left it hanging on the coat rack like I might actually need it again. I stood in the middle of the living room for a long minute, just existing. People don't need knives to cut you. They just need an audience and a smile. That line hadn't left my mind since Callista opened her mouth in that reading room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. That's the thing about people like her. They stab softly and let the echo do the bleeding. I walked to my desk, turned on the lamp, and sat down without turning on the computer yet. My eyes were fixed on the envelope, still resting beside the mousepad. A part of me wondered if I'd imagined it. Maybe there was no USB, no last message from my father, no vindication. Just another way to humiliate me in private, instead of public. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Heather. Hope you're doing okay. That was intense. Let me know if you want to talk. She didn't defend me at the table, didn't speak up. Just now, reaching out with a shallow offering of sympathy. After the fact, when it cost nothing. I didn't reply. I turned off the screen and finally reached for the USB. It was small and smooth, black like a piece of coal. I rolled it between my fingers, then hesitated. What if it was empty? What if he'd left something for me just to appease a dying guilt? Or worse, what if it confirmed what Callista said? That it was all in my head. That my memories of him promising the house, of saying, "You're the only one who really sees this place," were fiction I created to fill in silence. I opened my laptop and watched the screen light up. My heart thudded harder than I wanted to admit. When the desktop loaded, I clicked into the USB folder. There was only one file. For Ardelia, play me. I hovered the cursor over it, but didn't click just yet. Instead, I opened my old email archive. I searched Dad and House. A handful of emails popped up. Most were mundane. Reminders to replace shingles, garden ideas, a photo of a light fixture he liked. Nothing that screamed, "This is yours." But then, I remembered the phone call. It was 6 days before he died. Late. I almost didn't pick up. The screen flashed Dad, and something in me told me not to let it go to voicemail. He sounded weak, breath shallow, like he was trying to say something but couldn't catch it. "Dad?" I'd said, sitting up in bed. "What's wrong?" Then a voice in the background, sharp and familiar. "Stop talking. Rest now." "Callista." The line went dead. Back then, I convinced myself it was nothing, a moment of confusion. But now, with everything unraveling, it felt like that was the moment he was trying to warn me, or tell me something vital. And she silenced him. I felt anger rise like bile in my throat. I opened a notebook, jotted down the date and time of the call. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but something about putting it on paper made it real. Back at the screen, I clicked the video file. It opened in a grainy frame. My father sat at his desk, his hair thinner, eyes more sunken than I remembered. The lighting was dim, a single desk lamp casting long shadows on the books behind him. He stared at the camera, his expression tired but deliberate. "If you're watching this," he began, "then I'm already gone." I sat up straight, fingers frozen on the trackpad. I should have done this face to face. I should have told you the things I left unsaid. But I feared what would happen if she found out. And now, I know the silence did more harm than good. He exhaled heavily. "I need you to listen closely, Ardelia. Because the house, what I said to you when your mother died, that it was yours to care for, to protect, that wasn't just comfort, that was intent." My heart pounded in my ears. "She'll fight it. Callista always fights when she's scared. But she's already done things I can't fix anymore." The screen shook slightly, like he'd bumped the desk. "But you were the only one who kept that house alive. You painted it back into something sacred. You stayed." His voice cracked. "And I'm sorry for the way I pulled back. It wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I knew if I got close again, she'd see it, and she'd try to destroy what I left behind." I covered my mouth with one hand. "She can't erase you, Ardelia. Not if you hold on." The screen went black. I stared at the screen long after it ended. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because that was the sentence. That was the one line that unraveled everything Callista tried to convince me was fiction. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't made it up. He said it, and he meant it. The room felt colder than it should have. Maybe it was the hum of the old AC unit struggling against the humid Charleston night, or maybe it was the way my father's face flickered on the screen, too real and too far gone all at once. His voice came through my laptop speakers, gravelly, tired, laced with something I hadn't heard in years. Fear. "If you're watching this, that means I'm gone, and Callista is trying to take what's yours." I didn't breathe. He was seated at his old desk in the study, the one with the broken drawer that never closed quite right. The lighting was poor, a single lamp casting hard shadows over his face. His eyes looked smaller, sunken, but alert. He wasn't rambling. He was delivering something he'd rehearsed in his head, probably a dozen times. I could tell by the pause between his sentences. "She came to the hospital with papers," he continued, staring straight into the camera. "Said it was just to make the taxes easier. Just temporary," she claimed. I wasn't strong enough to argue. I couldn't even hold a spoon that day, Ardelia. I barely knew where I was. He pressed his lips together. That gesture, I'd seen it countless times as a child, when he was trying not to lose his temper. "She timed it," he said flatly. "Waited until your aunt left the room. Waited until the medication had fully hit. She put the pen in my hand, Ardelia. I signed because I trusted her. That was my mistake." My knuckles whitened against the edge of the desk. I'd always suspected. But hearing him say it, was something else entirely. That wasn't paranoia. That wasn't dramatizing. That was betrayal in his own words. He leaned back in his chair, as if exhausted by the admission. "I should have told you sooner, but I thought if I didn't bring it up, she'd do the right thing." A humorless smile crossed his lips. "She never had a reason to." The screen went dark for a few seconds. I thought the file had ended, but it picked back up. His face closer now. "I left something else," he whispered. "If she hasn't found it, it's yours. And if she has, well, then you know what she's capable of. That was it. No dramatic ending. No tearful goodbye. Just a quiet warning, recorded by a man who knew the truth would come too late. I sat there, numb. My hands hovered above the keyboard, then dropped to my lap. The silence in my apartment was deafening now. Even the AC seemed to pause out of respect. I snapped out of it and opened a browser. Something told me to check my old email backups. I'd set up a sync to a cloud folder years ago, one I hadn't accessed in ages. Most people forget digital footprints. Callista wasn't most people. She knew exactly how to make a trail disappear. I searched by keyword, house. There it was. An email from me to my father, dated 3 days before the hospital papers were supposedly signed. Subject line, thank you. The message read, Dad, thank you for trusting me with the house. I'll never let it fall into the wrong hands. The timestamp lined up perfectly. He knew then. We talked about it. He agreed. There was no misunderstanding. He gave me his word, and I believed him. Because unlike Callista, he didn't say things just to say them. The folder had been deleted from my local inbox, which meant someone had logged in, searched for that keyword, and cleared it. Someone who didn't expect me to remember the backup. I closed the browser and leaned back. I thought back to the moment in the reading room, when Callista made her little speech, pretending to be surprised about the house. But something about her smile had bothered me. It hadn't been smug. It had been prepared. She knew what was coming. She planned her performance like a courtroom summation. That wasn't emotion. It was strategy. I played that moment in my head again and again, picturing the way her mouth tilted slightly before she spoke, the way her eyes scanned the room first, like checking for support. She wasn't reacting. She was executing. And I just sat there, let her paint me as delusional, sentimental, small. But not anymore. I grabbed a pen and pulled out my notepad, wrote down everything I could recall, dates, phrases from the video, when the email was sent, when I got that strange call she interrupted. I drew connections like I was mapping a crime scene, because that's what it was, a crime dressed in family language. This wasn't a misunderstanding, I muttered aloud, jaw tightening. This was a setup. I stared at the page, then underlined a name, Ellis Gray, my father's attorney before she had him replaced. I wasn't going to barge into Callista's world unarmed. I wasn't going to walk into any conversation without receipts. I was going to do what I did best. Observe, gather, document. They thought the quiet one wouldn't notice. But I don't forget. I document. I reached for my drawer and pulled out a spare USB, my own this time. I copied the video, the recovered email, and started building a folder labeled Truth. The progress bar ticked up slowly, but I didn't look away. As it completed, I whispered to myself, not for courage, but as confirmation. Let's play this like Callista would, cold, careful, and devastating. The next morning, the sky over Charleston was smeared in gray, and the humidity already clung to the skin like regret. I slid into a parking spot across from that cafe on Meeting Street, the one Callista treated like her second office, and killed the engine. I sat for a beat, watching people shuffle in and out with their espresso orders and carefully curated lives. I wasn't nervous. I was calculated. I didn't come to start a war. But I wasn't going to leave with silence either. I walked in like I belonged there, like I'd been there 100 times before. My hair was tied back, no makeup, neutral tones, clean, sharp, undistracted. I spotted her immediately, corner table by the window, as always. Laptop open, phone face down, half a cappuccino gone. She didn't look surprised when her eyes met mine. Of course she didn't. Callista never let herself be caught off guard. That would be too human. I figured it'd be today, she said, barely glancing up. I slid into the seat across from her, not even bothering to order a drink. From my bag, I pulled out the printed screenshot and placed it face up on the table. Recognize this? I asked. Her gaze didn't even flinch. She glanced at it like it was a grocery list. "You've been busy," she said with that signature smirk. "I tend to get that way when someone tries to rewrite my history." She leaned back. "It's just a house, Ardelia." "It's not about the house, and you know it." She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her drink, took a slow sip, and tilted her head slightly. "I just don't think you're the kind of person who thrives in responsibility. You love art, not structure. You see everything emotionally." "You mean unlike you?" I asked calmly. "Who sees everything like a spreadsheet? You don't have to be snide. And you don't have to be dishonest." She shrugged, setting her cup down. "Dad made his choices. If you can't accept that—" I cut her off, pulling out a second page. This one had weight. It was a photo I'd taken last night of a handwritten letter, our father's, found folded inside a book of estate law that had somehow survived her purging. Her eyes locked onto it the second I laid it down. The words visible read, "Dana, the house should be—" "You've seen this before, haven't you?" I asked. Silence. "That wasn't addressed to you," she finally said, voice low. "That doesn't answer the question." Her jaw tightened. That was the crack. "You read it," I said, voice steady. "Then you buried it, because it didn't fit the version you were constructing." Callista didn't respond, but she didn't need to. The way she didn't reach for the page, didn't challenge its authenticity, confirmed everything. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ardelia," she said finally, quietly. "Do you really want to dig up everything?" "Yes," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "Everything, including what you signed when he was under sedation." That hit. Her nostrils flared. I stood slowly, gathering the papers without rushing. "I'm not who I was 10 years ago," I told her. "You knew me as the one who backed down, the one who apologized too much. I'm not her anymore." "You don't have the resources," she said, as if to console herself. "You're not equipped for this." "I don't need what you think I do," I said. "What I have is better. Proof." I turned and walked out. Didn't glance back. The air hit my face like a cleansing slap the moment I stepped outside. I didn't even realize how tightly I'd been holding my shoulders until they dropped. I made my way back to the car, pulled the door shut, and sat for a long moment in silence. There was a time I'd cried after conversations like that. A time when being dismissed, diminished, ignored. It'd eat me alive for weeks. But that time was gone. Callista thought silence meant weakness. This time, it would be the weight she couldn't outrun. Back at my apartment, hours later, I was organizing the documents, photos, video backups, even the time-stamped email, into folders when something caught my eye. A scanned copy of the hospital transfer form. I hadn't paid it much attention before, but now, with fresh eyes and a sharper sense of pattern, I noticed something odd. There was no witness signature, not a missing line, not an illegible scrawl. Just nothing. I zoomed in to confirm. Every legal document my father had ever signed had 2 witnesses. Always. It was his rule. One from his side, one from the other. This one had only one name, Callista's. And even that was tucked at the bottom, scribbled quickly like an afterthought. "Legal documents without a witness?" I whispered to myself. "That's not a mistake. That's a plan." I picked up my phone and scrolled to Ellis's contact. My thumb hovered over the dial for a breath longer than it needed to. Then I tapped it. It rang twice before I heard his voice. "Ellis Gray." "It's Ardelia," I said. "I need you to look at something. Tonight." "What's going on?" "I think the forgery goes deeper than we thought." By early afternoon, the sky over Charleston had turned brittle and pale, like it couldn't decide between sun or storm. I parked near the corner of Wentworth and breezed past a bakery whose windows steamed from the heat of morning rolls. 2 blocks later, I stood outside a tidy brick building with black shutters and a discreet brass plaque. Ellis Gray, attorney at law. His office was exactly as I remembered it. Quiet, measured, clinical without being cold. There was something in the way Ellis arranged things: law books in perfect rows, family photos limited to one small frame near the printer, that told you he didn't deal in emotion, just facts. But as I placed the unsigned hospital transfer papers on his desk, I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. "Tell me I'm not losing my mind," I said, pulling the paper toward him so he could see the signature block. He reached for his glasses. Took maybe 3 seconds to spot it. "There's no witness," he said flatly, then leaned back. "This should have never gone through. It's legally incomplete. If your father had been in full mental capacity, no lawyer, no legitimate lawyer, would have accepted this as final." So the notary? Likely never existed. I exhaled slowly. My instincts had been screaming since the moment I saw Callista at that reading, cool and rehearsed. This only sharpened the scream into something actionable. Ellis tapped the folder on the edge of his desk, thoughtful. "You know," he said, almost to himself, "he gave me something." "What?" "A month before he passed. He showed up unannounced, no appointment, slid a small envelope across this desk and said, 'If things go wrong, give this to Ardelia.'" "You didn't think they'd gone wrong?" I asked. "I didn't know what she was capable of." He stood, crossed to the filing cabinet, and unlocked a small drawer. Inside was a single envelope, my name written in my father's handwriting. He handed it to me, and I opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a USB. I didn't need to ask what was on it. It was the same one he'd given me, but knowing he left a copy with Ellis meant something. "He anticipated all of this," Ellis said, confirming what I was already thinking. "He knew her better than I thought," I murmured. "Or worse." There was a long pause. Then Ellis leaned forward again, professional tone back in place. "You said the notary is missing. You said there was pressure. What exactly happened at the hospital?" I explained everything. How Callista had interrupted calls, the voicemail she cut off, the way the timing of the signature matched the day my father could barely hold down soup. Ellis was quiet for a moment. "I need to tell you something else." He pulled out a legal pad. "I was removed as your father's estate attorney 2 months before he passed. No explanation. I received a call from Monroe Holdings' board secretary. Said a family member had requested a legal reassignment. The replacement?" "Let me guess," I said. "Callista's firm." "Her associate. Someone she worked with on corporate filings." My fingers curled into my palms. The replacement, the timing, the missing witness. It wasn't just shady, it was planned. I looked him square in the eye. "Can we challenge it retroactively?" "If the documents were signed under duress, or with diminished capacity, yes. But it'll take time and documentation." "Good," I said. "I don't do easy, I do right." We spent the next 2 hours assembling a packet: statements, dates, copy of the email, the transcription of the video, a list of every document we could tie to that day. At the top of the folder, I wrote, "Challenge, Monroe House." As I left Ellis's office, the heat had finally broken. The wind was picking up, blowing pollen from the oak trees across the sidewalk like golden dust. I wasn't ready to go home yet. Instead, I drove past the house. I didn't park. I didn't get out. I just slowed as I passed, windows down, letting the air inside. Mr. Halford was out in his yard next door, watering his tomatoes. He glanced up, squinting, then smiled when he saw me. "You know," he called out, turning off the hose, "your daddy told me once, this house only breathes when Ardelia's in it." I couldn't answer. My throat caught around something that felt like dignity. "He said you gave it life," he added, stepping closer to the sidewalk. "After your mama passed, he told me you kept it whole when the rest of us couldn't look at it." I nodded. "Thank you." It wasn't just a neighbor's kindness. It was a reminder that someone had seen. Back home, my inbox pinged. Ellis had sent over the draft. Subject: Intent to challenge transfer of property, Monroe Estate. I opened it, read every line twice. At the bottom, the cursor blinked next to my name, waiting for digital signature. I stared at it for a long moment. Not because I doubted, but because I realized this wasn't about wanting to win. It was about refusing to be erased. She used the law to take, I said out loud, as if speaking to the silence around me. I'll use the law to reclaim. I clicked sign. The message came at 2:47 p.m. Just a casual text from Heather. Dinner tonight? Rooftop at the Ashton. A few of us are gathering. Should be good to see some familiar faces. Familiar faces. I read that phrase twice. There was no mention of Callista, but I didn't need confirmation. This wasn't a reunion. It was a stage. I almost didn't reply. But then I thought about how they expected me to react. Silence. Retreat. Maybe even bitterness masquerading as dignity. Instead, I typed one word. Sure. And hit send. By 6, I'd pulled my hair into a low chignon and stepped into a slate-gray dress that hit just below the knees. No statement jewelry, no red lipstick. I didn't come to perform. I came to be present. Fully. Intentionally. The rooftop restaurant buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. The view of Charleston below shimmered in the amber glow of sunset. Heather spotted me first, waved me over with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You made it," she said, like we were old sorority sisters instead of cousins tangled in legal warfare. "Figured I'd see what all the buzz was about," I said calmly. She motioned toward the table. 8 seats, 5 already filled with a curated mix of extended family and longtime family friends. Most of them had aligned with Callista after the will reading, though few had reached out directly. They nodded politely, like I was a guest speaker no one had expected. The meal began with pleasantries, talk of Charleston traffic, college tuition, real estate values. I let them lead. I let them talk, because I knew it was coming, and it did. Midway through the entrees, a projector screen lowered at the far end of the rooftop. Heather clinked her glass gently. "We wanted to take a moment tonight to honor Uncle Jonathan," she announced. "He meant a lot to all of us, and to remind ourselves of the legacy he left behind." The lights dimmed. The video began. A soft piano melody played under images of my father, at board meetings, cutting ribbons, laughing at black tie galas, photos of him with Callista, him with business partners, him holding baby Heather, even old footage of him speaking at conferences, surrounded by plaques, but not one frame of him with me. Not a photo, not a mention, nothing. The video ended. The lights came up. I didn't move. I didn't blink. This wasn't forgetting. This was erasure. I turned slowly toward Heather, who gave me that "I hope you understand" look. "Callista thought it'd be less confusing this way," she whispered. "It's been a lot for everyone." I picked up my water glass, sipped slowly, set it down with deliberate grace. "If I'm not part of the legacy," I said clearly, "stop expecting me to uphold its silence." A hush fell over the table. One uncle shifted uncomfortably. Someone stood and mumbled something about needing to call the sitter. I didn't follow their eyes. I didn't need to. I didn't stay for dessert. Outside, the city air was thick and electric. A woman stood near the exit, watching me. Older. Her gray hair tucked under a felt cloche, the kind you don't see much anymore. She stepped forward. "Ardelia?" I nodded, cautious but curious. "I knew your mother," she said. "Eleanor was my best friend." I stared. She looked nothing like the photos, but the name sounded familiar. Miss Lorna. "She always said," she continued, "that house, it didn't belong to her or Jonathan. It belonged to you. You gave it life again after grief hollowed it out." I swallowed, nodded slowly. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." She patted my hand and walked away, disappearing into the crowd like a character in a novel. Back in my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I just stood in the kitchen, holding that memory like a shield. Then I walked to the back room, pulled out every folder, envelope, journal, and hard drive I could find. This wasn't about property anymore. This was about history, about voice, about refusing to be edited out. I texted Ellis, "Start preparing the motion. We're not waiting anymore." By 9, my table was covered in photos. My mother in the garden. Me sanding down the porch rail. Letters my father wrote on yellow legal pads, dated and smudged. I scanned them one by one, organized by year. Nothing flashy, just truth, stacked neatly, ready for court. Then came the knock. Not loud, just 3 quick taps. I opened the door to find no one. But at my feet, a padded envelope, no name, no postage, just my address, handwritten in blocky letters. I picked it up. Inside, a flash drive and a sticky note with 5 words. Not everyone is on her side. I didn't breathe. I walked to the desk, inserted the drive, clicked open the single folder inside. The first video thumbnail showed Callista and my father in his hospital bed. My finger hovered over play. The rain began softly, almost shy, tapping against my apartment windows like a warning. I hadn't turned on any lights, just the blue glow of my laptop screen lit the room. Outside, thunder rolled faintly, the kind that stayed low and unsettled, the kind you felt more than heard. I sat at my desk, the flash drive from the anonymous envelope snug in its port. One folder, one file, one truth maybe. I clicked it open. The grainy footage wasn't from a phone. It was from a mounted camera, angled high, slightly tilted, capturing a wide view of my father's study. The old rug I used to lie on with my crayons was still there. The walls lined with books he never stopped reading, no matter how tired he got. And in the center of it all, him. He looked thinner than I remembered. His shoulders slumped inward, robe barely draped over his frame. He was propped in his armchair, breathing shallowly. The lighting was dim. Sunlight filtered through drawn blinds, hinting it had been filmed mid-morning. Then Callista appeared. She walked into frame, holding a stack of papers and a plastic cup. Her voice came in clear. "Daddy, I just need you to look these over. It's nothing big, just tax stuff." He shifted, confused. "This isn't what we discussed." She crouched beside him, her back to the camera, and placed the cup on the side table. "I'll take care of it. I always do." He looked at her, long, tired. "I'm not sure I—" She placed a pen in his hand. "Just sign, Daddy." And he did. There was no flourish, no acknowledgement, just the quiet compliance of someone worn thin, someone who'd been taught all his life that conflict was something to avoid, not confront. The footage ended as she turned and walked out, never glancing at the camera. I sat there, heart thudding, not with grief anymore, but with clarity. "She drugged him," I whispered. There was no outrage in my voice, only precision. The cup hadn't been water. It was familiar. A nutritional drink he used when he was too nauseous to eat. She used his weakness, his routine, and his trust, and she weaponized it. I watched the video 3 more times, then again at half speed. I didn't cry. I studied. "This wasn't estate planning," I murmured. "It was a power grab in disguise." I copied the file to 3 separate USBs, then uploaded it to a cloud folder only I could access, password protected with a string only I would remember. Mom's Garden, 1994. The next morning, rain still misted the sidewalks as I stepped into Ellis's office. He looked up from his desk, eyes narrowing when he saw my face. "I need you to watch something," I said. It took less than a minute into the video before he stood up. "This is criminal." "Will it hold up?" He crossed his arms. "Depends who finds out first, us or them." I nodded. "Then we don't wait." I left his office with a clarity I hadn't had in years. But clarity doesn't stop intrusion. That night, I returned home late. I knew the moment my hand hit the doorknob. Something was off. It gave too easily. I stepped inside, flipped on the light, drawers open, documents scattered, laptop missing. I walked in slowly, checking the back door, the closet, the windows. Nothing broken. Just the quiet chaos of someone looking for something specific. But they didn't find it. Because the drive had been in my jacket pocket all day. She didn't just want the house, I whispered to the empty apartment. She wanted the evidence to disappear. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, and breathed. I didn't panic. I didn't call the police. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the bank the next morning. I unlocked the safety deposit box, tucked behind a nondescript panel, in a private room. Inside was the second flash drive. Identical file. Untouched. You can't outmaneuver someone who's already lived through being underestimated, I said to the metal box as I sealed it again. Back at home that evening, I was just finishing organizing duplicates, paper, digital, legal, when the intercom buzzed. It was after 10. I walked to the panel and pressed the button. Ms. Quinn? A man's voice asked. Not familiar, but clear. Firm. Yes? I have information about your sister, but we need to talk, in private. I froze. The monitor showed a man in a windbreaker, early 50s maybe, holding a folder. He wasn't looking at the camera, just waiting. I pressed the release button. And as I unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway, one thought pulsed behind my eyes. The moment I opened that door, I stepped into the part of my family's legacy no one wanted to claim. 2 days later, I stepped out of the elevator and into the polished lobby of the Charleston Arbitration Center. Everything smelled like new carpet and cold resolution. Ellis walked beside me, carrying a single folder and his usual sense of restrained fire. I didn't say a word to him, not because I had nothing to say, but because the words had already been said in emails, in meetings, in nights I spent sorting documents at my kitchen table instead of sleeping. The receptionist led us down a narrow hall. At the end, a glass door opened into the hearing room. Oval table, 7 chairs, and Callista, already seated. She didn't stand when I entered, just turned her head slightly, expression unreadable. I didn't greet her. I locked eyes, just long enough to show I wasn't stepping into this space with shame. I came with purpose. The time for second chances had passed. I was here for resolution. Ellis slid the folder onto the table with quiet precision. The mediator, a woman in her 60s with the kind of no-nonsense face you see on retired judges, nodded and invited us all to begin. There were 3 other relatives present, 2 on Callista's side, one who hadn't spoken to me since our mother's funeral. Ellis stood. We'd like to begin with Exhibit A. I opened my purse and placed the flash drive gently on the table. The screen on the wall lit up and the video began. There was my father, tired, gray but composed, seated in his study. If you're watching this, he said, then I'm gone. And if I'm gone, you've likely already seen how quickly control can shift in silence. Callista's shoulders straightened. I want to be clear, he continued. That house, the one Ardelia cared for, the one she maintained and kept breathing, it belongs to her. I may not have said it loud enough while I was alive, but I'm saying it now. Let there be no doubt. Callista opened her mouth, but Ellis held up his hand. We request the room remain silent until the evidence is presented in full. She sat back, eyes burning. The video continued. My father spoke of Callista's pressure, her visits to the hospital, the sudden replacement of legal counsel. He spoke with regret, but also with intention. When it ended, silence held the room like glue. Then I stood. I have additional testimony. I handed copies of letters signed by our former neighbors. People who remembered the years I stayed after Mom died. People who saw me repainting shutters, cleaning the gutters, planting new grass on my own dime. She lived there, one of the letters read. She preserved it. We all saw it. One of the relatives shifted uncomfortably. Another glanced down at the table, like the grain of the wood was suddenly fascinating. Callista stood then, voice tight. So this is it? Emotional blackmail dressed up in nostalgia? I didn't flinch. The only manipulation here was chemical and recorded. Ellis slid another envelope across the table. Motion to freeze Ms. Monroe's current claim on the property, effective immediately pending review. Callista's hands curled into fists at her sides. This is theater. No, I said. This is truth at full volume, and it doesn't care who finds it inconvenient. The mediator reviewed the documents in silence. Then, finally, she looked up. Given the evidence, we will proceed with immediate review. Ms. Monroe, your claim is suspended pending legal validation of the material presented today. Callista stepped away from the table. Her chair screeched. She didn't say goodbye, didn't glare. Just walked out like a woman who'd rehearsed every scenario. Except this one. The rest of the room stayed still. Eyes avoided mine. Ellis nodded toward the door, signaling we were done. Outside, the sun hit me in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. Not warm, not cold, just real. In the lobby, I sat briefly on a bench to collect my thoughts. My hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of surviving a moment you've been building toward for so long, you forget it has an end. I looked down at them, flexed my fingers, and whispered, "One more truth, and she's finished." The morning after the hearing, Charleston was still. The rain had lifted, but left the sky washed out, like the city was trying to remember what clear looked like. I stood by the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the world move slowly. From up here, everything seemed normal. Someone walking a dog, a kid late for school, a delivery truck parked halfway on the curb. But inside, it was anything but normal. You can win the battle and still feel like the war is watching. I sipped the coffee. It tasted burnt. Maybe I'd used the wrong ratio of grounds again. Maybe I was too distracted to care. The paper lay on the counter, still folded. No headlines about the hearing, no photos. Just silence in black ink. Until 2 hours later, when my phone lit up. A text from a friend in Savannah. "Girl, you're on the blogs. Callista's not gonna like this." The link came with it. I tapped. Headline: Monroe Legacy Contested. Private hearing. Public fallout. The article didn't mention my name, yet. But the comments did. People speculated about which daughter was in the video. About what was said. One blog embedded a short clip. Callista storming out, lips pressed so tight they'd turned white. The narrative was changing. My phone rang. Cousin Lynn. "You did the right thing," she said, voice hushed like we were hiding from someone. "But she's coming back meaner." "She already was mean," I replied. "Now she's just visible." There were voicemails from family I hadn't heard from in years. Some were gentle apologies. Others were angry, accusatory, masked as concern. "You should have handled this privately," one said. "It's not what your father would have wanted." Except it was exactly what he wanted. He just didn't say it until the end. That afternoon, I drove out to the cemetery. The ground was still damp. My mother's headstone had soft moss growing along the bottom. I knelt, brushing it gently with my sleeve. "I think I finally understand why you never raised your voice," I whispered. "Silence isn't absence, it's choice. And today, I'm choosing to speak." I stayed until the sky turned orange behind the trees. Back at the house, I walked room to room with a notebook in hand. Not to make repairs, just to see. There were things I hadn't noticed before. A new light fixture in the upstairs hall. A framed sketch tucked in the linen closet. Something I drew at 12 that my father must have saved. In his study, the drawer I rarely opened slid out with more resistance than usual. Inside was a single page. Lined paper. Familiar handwriting. "What she loves in the house," it began. Underneath, the creak in the third stair. The chipped tile in the kitchen. The garden that smells like rosemary after rain. The way sunlight hits the west windows at 4:10 p.m. The studio that makes her quiet, not small at the bottom, in thicker ink. It's her home, not her battlefield. I closed the drawer slowly, pressing the page to my chest. Then the voicemail came. "Ms. Quinn," the voice said, "this is Lydia Wells. I cared for your father his last month. I thought you should know. There's something I never put in writing, but I remember it clear as day." Click, static. Then her voice again. He said it 3 times, every time I helped him out of bed. "Don't let her take the house from Ardelia." That exact sentence, over and over. I saved the message, sent it to Ellis with one word. Added, "Sometimes the quietest voices are the ones the truth trusts most." Just past sunset, I curled up in the window seat of the back parlor. The lights were dim, but my mind wasn't. I thought about what was coming, because I could feel it, like static under the skin. A second storm, waiting. And it arrived. The phone buzzed. Caller ID. Callista. I answered slowly. "Hello?" A pause. Then her voice, low and cold. "You think it's over, but the Monroe name doesn't fall quietly." Click, no goodbye, no hesitation, just the threat, suspended in air. 2 days had passed since Callista's call, but its echo still hung in the air like a storm that hadn't quite broken. I was back at Ellis's office, reviewing every inch of the final legal package, when his assistant stepped in, holding a phone with her knuckles tight around it. "You'll want to see this," she said, barely above a whisper. Ellis clicked into the browser, and there it was. Headlines scrolling across the screen like they couldn't wait to spill. "Sister versus sister. The Monroe house. War goes public." The footage had leaked. Arbitration footage. My father's video. The nurse's voicemail. The legal freezing of Callista's claim. All of it, out in the wild. I blinked once, then twice. "The Monroe name didn't fall quietly," I murmured. "It fell like thunder." Ellis watched me carefully. "This was inevitable." "Good," I said. "Let it fall." By the time I left the building, my phone had pinged 11 times. Some were texts, some links, a few voicemails I didn't bother to open. But one message stood out. It came with a photo. My mother's photo album. I had scanned it and posted the images online just that morning, quietly, without fanfare. Just the pages. Me with paint in my hair, dirt on my knees, that faded shot of me patching the back fence while Callista smiled from a gala miles away. Margins full of my father's notes. "Ardelia fixed this. She planted these. She stayed." And people saw it. The comments poured in. Strangers who knew exactly what this felt like. Not just the fight for fairness, but the ache of being made invisible. One woman wrote, "This is what legacy really looks like. Grit, not inheritance." By afternoon, I was trending. The family group chat I hadn't looked at in weeks lit up like fireworks. A few tried to defend Callista, clinging to polished narratives and public appearances. But more than one cousin sent a quiet message my way. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." I didn't respond, but I screenshotted every word. Across town, a board Callista sat on released a vague but pointed statement. "We take matters of ethical standing seriously and are currently reviewing the situation." I sent the link to Ellis. He replied with a 3-word email. "Suit officially filed. Ardelia Quinn v. Callista Monroe. Estate misrepresentation." That night, I was offered a televised interview. I turned it down without blinking. "Truth doesn't need ratings," I told the producer. "It needs witnesses." Before sunset, I drove to the house. It was quiet, no lights on, the garden overgrown, but not beyond repair. The smell of rosemary still clung to the walkway. I used my key, the real one. The locks had already been changed back to my name. It felt symbolic to do it again myself. I stood by the door, turned the key, twisted the knob, and stepped inside. I walked the property like I was reacquainting myself with a friend I hadn't seen in years. Upstairs, downstairs, out back. I went to the garden, where my mother's gloves still hung from a rusted nail on the shed. A small sign now hung from the gate. Private, no trespassing. The paperwork had cleared. The house was mine. Legally, undeniably, finally. That night, just as I was locking up and settling into the old reading chair by the window, I heard a soft thump. An envelope slipped under my door. I froze. No stamp, no return address, just my name. Ardelia, handwritten in my father's cursive. Inside, a single sheet of paper. No preamble, no signature. Just a line I knew was his. The legacy is what you protect when no one believes it's yours. I stared at it, letting every word sink into my bones. And in that moment, I realized he hadn't left me a house. He'd left me a test. Saturday morning arrived without fanfare. No headlines, no emails, just the warm hush of Charleston spring leaning through the windows like it had permission to finally breathe again. I stood in the hallway of the house, my house now, and took it in. Not as a battleground, not as evidence, just as home. I moved slowly from room to room, not inspecting, not cataloging, just feeling. The creak in the third stair was still there, and this time it comforted me. The way the morning light curved across the floor of the dining room, it hadn't changed. But I had. For the first time in years, I wasn't in fight or flight mode. I was just still. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was mine to grieve in, to breathe in, to grow in. I paused in the hallway near the back door. From the shelf beside it, I lifted one photo frame. My mother, mid-laugh, dirt on her knees, wearing a wide-brimmed hat in the garden. Her joy wasn't posed. It was caught. I placed it on the console table in the foyer, not because I needed to see her every day, but because it felt right. The other photos, I left them in the box. Some memories don't belong on display. They belong tucked close to the chest, where no one can edit them. I sat in my father's old chair and closed my eyes for a moment. His final words echoed, not the ones from the video, but the last thing I remembered him saying when he could still string thoughts together. Protect the legacy. I used to think that meant preservation. Now I knew it meant evolution. Callista hadn't reached out. No email, no apology. Not even a legal rebuttal. A few relatives had. Some sent short, awkward texts. Hope you're doing okay. One even wrote, you know family can be complicated. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because the version of me that needed their validation had already been buried and mourned. Closure is overrated. Clarity is enough. That afternoon, I was reorganizing files in the study when I noticed a dusty folder labeled Property Improvements. I almost skipped it. It sounded like receipts and zoning permits, but something made me open it. Inside were architectural sketches, elevation drawings, handwritten notes. I remembered these. They were ideas I'd rambled off to my father years ago, ways to open the back patio, maybe add a greenhouse extension. I didn't think he took them seriously, but he had. His handwriting lined the margins. For Ardelia, so her ideas always have a home. Even in silence, he had been listening. And now, I was ready to rebuild. Not just walls, but the story of this place. I emailed a local nonprofit about using the annex for community art classes. Nothing fancy, just a space where people could make things without judgment or fees. I reopened the upstairs studio, not as an escape anymore, but as an anchor. That evening, a neighbor knocked. Glad to see the lights back on, she said. Feels like the house can finally breathe again. The next day, while watering the rosemary near the garden shed, I saw her. A woman I didn't recognize at first, standing just outside the gate. She looked like someone from another chapter of life. Wide-set eyes, gray-streaked hair tucked beneath a sun hat, posture that hinted at years of standing at chalkboards or stages. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stepped closer. You don't know me, she said softly, but I knew your father when he was my teacher. And I think there's something of his he meant to give you. The woman at the gate held the box like it was made of glass. Her voice was soft, but there was weight behind it, like she'd rehearsed this moment in her mind more than once. He told me you were the only one who'd understand what legacy should mean. I took the box and thanked her without asking too many questions. She didn't stay long, just placed a hand on my shoulder, nodded once, and disappeared down the sidewalk like someone finishing an old promise. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the lid. Inside was a journal, aged but clean, with my father's handwriting on the first page. To AQ, to be opened only by her. His script had changed in his final years. More careful, less rushed. The first few entries were mundane. Meeting notes, thoughts about the house, names of books he wanted to read again. But then I turned to a page that didn't look like the others. The words were heavier, more deliberate. Callista fears irrelevance. That fear has made her cruel. I was wrong to protect her through silence. Then, stapled to the next page, a revised will, dated, notarized. Every asset, including the estate, foundation shares, and trust funds, assigned to me. No ambiguity. It wasn't just a confession. It was a correction. I drove the documents to Ellis that same afternoon. He read through each line, jaw tight, eyes scanning as if they were looking for tricks. But there were none. "I'll file it today," he said, "and I'll call the DA." 2 weeks later, the charges were filed. Callista Monroe, my sister, was formally accused of estate fraud, document suppression, and obstruction. Her publicist issued a statement riddled with half-truths and lawyered remorse. But the Monroe Foundation made it clear they were cutting ties. The woman who once stood at charity galas as their golden heir was no longer welcome at the podium. "I didn't have to destroy her," I told Ellis when the news broke. "The truth did it for me." We didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no victory dinner, just a quiet morning, a stack of legal confirmations, and space to finally exhale. A week later, I hosted a gathering in the garden. No invitations, just word of mouth. Former neighbors, artists, local students, the ones who remembered what the house had once been, and what it could still be. We unveiled a new sign at the gate. Quinn House for Independent Artists. It wasn't about grandeur, it was about roots. I walked the garden path that day, through rows of rosemary and thyme, down to the edge where my mother once grew tomatoes. The blooms were fuller now, as if they'd been waiting. That night, I returned to the studio, my studio. The canvas on the easel was nearly done, something I'd started during the thickest part of the legal chaos. It was a collage of photographs, my father's handwriting, my mother's hands in the soil, my own reflection caught in a windowpane. I titled it, "The Silence Between Us." I placed it beside my father's old chair. Not as a shrine, not as forgiveness, as acknowledgement. Before locking up, I turned off every light except one, the porch. I stepped outside to let the evening settle, and just as I reached for the door to head back in, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, a text from a reporter came through. "Would you consider speaking on record? The community deserves your voice." I stared at the screen for a while. Then, I turned the phone off. The Monroe name didn't define me. I rewrote it, with steadiness, with scars, with strength. And when the last chapter closed, it didn't echo with applause. It settled into peace. I didn't win because I fought. I won because I refused to be erased.